to capitalize on economic trends? What are the new era opportunities for women partaking in careers of the future? And how do we ensure our female workforce to be adequately skilled?
Very much for coming in. We have a great panel on women in workforce, the economic case. The minister is going to join us just shortly, but she suggested we start because we wouldn't like everyone to wait. So we're requesting our moderator, Archna Vyas from BMGF, to please start the proceedings. Over to you, Archna.
Thank you so much. And can I just request my panelists to come here? You can, do you want to?
What would you want to?
Go ahead. I'll sit on this. I'll take the corner one. Okay. If that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, cool. So thank you everyone for joining this morning. The topic that we're discussing today is women in workforce, and I would actually like to say that it's not necessarily women in workforce, but it's come to a time when we should be thinking about women-driven workforce, because if I think about it, reflecting a little bit in terms of what I've been observing in WEF, right? Human advancements when it comes to technology, AI, in terms of how even progress on health and development has been made is pretty impressive. But last year, the data that was coming out of WEF itself pointed to the fact that the gender parity actually has slipped from 99 years to more than 130 years. So at one end, you have space missions, you have AI, you have electrical vehicles, you have so much of fantastic delivery that humans can deliver, but on the other end, it's also human peril, right? And I say this gender gap is really human peril because it's up to us. It is up to us to make the change. And I would say that in today's century, and sitting in this totally economic, magnetic epicenter, it is up to us to make the change. It is not acceptable. And I have this fantastic panel. So I did just a rough calculation of what my fantastic panelists and where do they come from. We are talking about really a might of close to about $40 billion sitting here with employees about, give or take 400 to 500,000 that they manage in their own organizations. They interact in their own organizations. And the vendor support, if I add that, that's going to be 1 million workforce. They're making changes and taking concrete steps when it comes to gender parity. But at the same time, with their voice and intellect, I'm hoping that we are able to surface some of the conversations in, we're still talking about 130 years of gap. What needs to be done, right? So I'm hoping that we will surface some of the barriers today, but at the same time, opportunities and solutions. Because many a times when I've spoken with global leaders, I've found that, they're wanting to make the change, but they don't know how. They're wanting to make the change, but they don't know what the solutions are and how to measure them. At Gates Foundation, where I lead the policy work, we're an extremely data-centric organization, but so are my panelists as well. Quick introduction, Alan, he is the co-founder of LinkedIn. Abanti, who is the Chief Public Affairs Officer. She also sits on the executive board of Mahindra Group. We have a great privilege of working with Abanti as well. And Maha, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer of the DP World. So thank you so much for joining us. And the Union Minister of Women and Child Development, under whose leadership and, of course, partnership of Confederation of Indian Industry, this lounge has been put together. She's running late. I know I've observed her during the panels this week. She does come in towards the end. So if she's able to join us, it'll be good to get her views as well, because India is doing some fantastic work and has contributed massively in terms of, and it is her vision and, that of the partners and like yourself, that the gender conversations are center stage at Davos. Not to an extent that AI is. I wish that next year we see a lot of gender equitable and gender inclusive WEF, led by all the organizations. But that's my hope and that's my vision. So I am going to first perhaps start with you, Alan, since you're sitting next to me. So one of the barriers as well as facilitators that we see when it comes to women in workforce, and especially underprivileged women who we work very closely about, technology has a role to play, and technology can be a facilitator when it comes to, equipping women, making them more empowered. Like, what are your views in terms of how can technology help with more women participation?
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I don't think it's going to come as any surprise to anyone here. Technology is a tremendous accelerator for entrepreneurs, for people who are working in all parts of life. But for women, for people who are interested in entering the workforce, interested in starting a business, interested in hiring employees, interested in interacting with the government properly, technology has become the primary way to do that and the cheapest way to do that. If you roll back the clock 30 years, almost all of the things you would do in a business was handled by another person, somebody else who you would have to find and you have to hire. They had the knowledge and specialty, you didn't have it. However, the story of the last 30 years, and LinkedIn obviously produces a bunch of enterprise software, is that almost everything that you need to succeed, no matter where you are in business, is now available online. Everything from the very simplest components of establishing a business, operating a business, to the kind of research you do when you're actually within a business, to the kinds of markets you have access to. And I think India is absolutely a leader in this space because India has leapfrogged to a sort of an omnipresent payment system, which is tremendously valuable resource and infrastructure for building up entrepreneurship. And because it's available to everybody, it's something which is incredibly inclusive. The real challenge, I think, in the world of technology is making sure that everyone has access to it. And everyone has access to it and everyone can use it effectively. So one of the things which is amazing, and as we were walking in, we were seeing recent accomplishments from the minister's work and from the work of this group and the foundation and everything, including a whole bunch of support groups. And when it comes to access to technology, that kind of thing, building people who can help you gain that access to technology, people who you can reach out to for help, is tremendously useful. So I think the technology is incredibly empowering to women, especially those who are entering the economy.
I actually want to just build on this, if I may.
Go ahead. Of course, of course.
Just in the
totally.
spirit of having a conversation. So I think technology is a big enabler both on the demand and the supply side. And I'll give a couple of examples on the demand side. Across some of our businesses, we are actually producing products, making products, which are more geared towards women using them. So, for example, tractors. So Mahindra is the world's largest tractor manufacturer by volume. We have very recently launched a light compact tractor. And there are technology features here, such as power buttons instead of tight levers, other sort of elements within the automation and technology pack in these lightweight tractors, which we think will enable more women farmers to actually use and drive these tractors. We have an electric three-wheeler business, which again we see good traction with women, many of whom are first-time credit borrowers, and the women prefer and are coming into using electric three-wheelers because of these being lighter as well as less speed. So there are speed limits on this. So just two examples of how through the use of technology you can actually make products that draw women and enable women to come into the into the workforce. On the supply side, we are actually working on enabling and empowering about 1 million women to come into the formalized workforce through creating a gender intentional employment matching, which is phygital and enabled through technology. And again, this is about really, therefore, matching demand and supply. So I just wanted to give these two examples
No,
to
that's
highlight the
fantastic
point.
because it's so important to keep in mind that, and this is where, your past biases come in terms of, technology built for larger part of the population, right? And say, for example, that's what we say even in terms of AI, that we have to ensure that AI is intentional, because whatever you feed in, if it's going to be biased, that's going to be determining the future as well in terms of how. So it is so important to design for keeping in mind the gender as well. Maha, I'm going to pick on you as well a little. Tell me, as one is talking about technology as a facilitator, there's also, one, the element of capacities, and the second is how do you make women really, come up to par when it comes to this new, new era, so to say, the careers of future.
So I agree, and I will echo the same, that technology is in our favor today. It's and then we're such a privileged time today where technology, automation, AI is moving at a faster pace than ever before. Many of the jobs in the past, and when I say in the past, I don't mean a century ago, I mean a decade ago, used to be categorized as manpower jobs, right? And those manpower jobs are extremely physically demanding, and they're not inclusive. They discourage women from joining those jobs. Take DP World, 80% of our jobs very recently were manpower jobs. So imagine, out of 100% of my jobs, only 20% are accessible and inclusive and available to women. 80% of the jobs are extremely physically demanding. They are on the port using heavy-duty machinery. But if I was a manpower company in the past, does not mean that I need to continue to be a manpower company going forward. Technology is helping convert many of these jobs from being a manpower job to being a brain power job. And when a job becomes a brain power, it is accessible to everyone, all genders. It is more inclusive. We have the same example. We used automation in our favor. So one of the jobs that's very famous in ports, it's a crane driver job. So a crane driver job is a job that you sit on a crane 65 meters above the ground, and you move containers, extremely heavy containers, from ship to the yard and yard to the ship. It's not the easiest job. It's extremely physically demanding. We literally had no woman doing this job because of the nature of it. When we built our port in Jabal Ali, Terminal 3, we automated this job. Today, this job is done from a remote controlled room behind a screen. When we posted the job, to our surprise, many of the applicants were women. Today, 96% of the crane drivers in Jabal Ali Terminal 3 are women, 22 of them. So imagine, with the power of automation, how we converted a job that traditionally had 0 women. Today, 96% of women doing the same job.
No, that's fantastic. Now, taking it a little further, changing gears a little bit from technology to the basics in terms of, learning and skilling, right? Some of the basic barriers that women face. We know that as more and more women are educated, they come into the formal economy. There's a recent study that actually points out to the fact that if more women are educated and in the workforce, actually the pay gap reduces as they move up as well. So how can we facilitate learning and skilling as well to get more women joining the workforce at a very, very basic and fundamental level? What are the policy shifts that are required?
So my career spans, so I've spent all my career in private sector, so I'm not a public policy expert, but I've learned a few things throughout my career that helped women join the workforce and join education. So there is no one policy fits all. There is no one global policy. Different countries are at different stages of their journey towards gender equality, right? Take my country. I come from the United Arab Emirates. 50% of the college graduates are women. 50% of STEM education is females. So we're in a very privileged country where we have the right social infrastructure and physical infrastructure that encourages and makes it easy for women to join education. Go to different countries. According to WHO, 51 countries have wash issues, water access, sanitization, and hygiene. And 7 out of 10 households, girls take the burden of going and fetching clean water for their family. And this takes hours of their day, stopping them from attending education and school. So where we operate around our communities, we've partnered with WaterAid to build these wash facilities closer to communities so girls don't have to walk every day for 10 kilometers, wasting their school time fetching water for their families. So it's really important to create those physical wash infrastructure closer to communities so girls can go to school instead of go and spend their time fetching waters. One more example, we worked with another hindrance is the commute to school. There's a story of a girl from Rwanda, 7-year-old. She wakes up every day at 6 a.m. and walks to the school with her father crossing the river. And if there is a flood, they go back. She doesn't go to school. So there's the organizations called Bridges for Prosperity. They build trail bridges to connect remote villages to school, healthcare facility, and workplace. So we worked with them in building 17 bridges last year in Rwanda. And the impact study shows that these bridges helped 60% increase of girls attending schools and 60% increase of women attending workforce.
You want to add? Yes.
Yeah. So I think policy has a big role to play, but so does public-private partnership, PPP. So I'll just cover off both. So I think policy has a big role to play in terms of addressing, as she said, health and sanitation issues that particularly women are vulnerable to. Also, policies which can help to help women to stay longer in higher education and in the kind of courses or programs, including STEM, which will lead to higher paying jobs in their careers. So what policies could, give additional incentives for women? And that's important because very often in certain societies, you don't have the easy permission for various reasons from the family, or the monetary incentives are not there in poorer families. So I think delaying women leaving the education system and also therefore implicitly delaying the age of marriage and potentially childbirth can have a big role to play as well. Because, about 45% of women in certain countries actually end up leaving the workforce because they have to look after children. So, what can be done to kind of delay even childbirth to some extent through the incentive of higher education and staying on course. I think also things like, let's say, cash transfers to households where woman is the head of the family can also make a difference. And then are there policies which will help access capital for women at reduced rates so that, women can stay as entrepreneurs or can get into entrepreneurship. So I think there's a waft of these. But these alone will not be enough. I think they are great signals. In India, for example, the maternity policy, the mandatory maternity policy of 6 months is like huge and, leading. So I think the private sector then comes in with an important role as well. And again, speaking from the Mahindra experience of over 2 decades of working to build employment-ready skills for women, over 2 decades, we've provided about 500,000 women with employment-ready skills. And what we find is that you need the private sector to come in to build industry-ready curriculums, to obviously invest in faculty that will deliver these. But what is also required is support from the government through, let's say, ITIs, polytechniques, etc., on infrastructure, and also help in mobilizing women to come through the door, which these can do more easily because, they are in the local community, they are already sort of present. And then the government can also step in with, let's say, accreditation for the programs that are delivered, so that women actually have, a certificate or a diploma that just helps them through a longer period of employment. So I think that role of public and private is very important. And the other example of something that the government does as a great signal for private sector to take further is maternity policy. So I'm very proud to say here that we as a Mahindra group actually launched a first ever in industry kind of a 5-year maternity support policy, where the whole theme was that we will partner young women who aspire to be mothers and who work in our group right through all stages of maternity, starting from planning their maternity, including benefit for assisted reproductive methods, and going all the way to providing flexibility and flexible support and work from any office kind of flexibility until your child is 3 years old, which is the point at which it becomes harder. It ceases to become as hard because the child can go to a play school for longer hours. So all through we partnered the women, and this was a program that was actually created by women, a bunch of women leaders, all of whom had lived through these experiences and these challenges, actually sat down, spoke to a lot of women, and then came in the group and then came up with this. So that's, again, just an example of the private sector having to build on something that policy has.
Totally agree with you that it is not just policies, it's also upon the private sector as well, because many a times the policies are not getting implemented. Alan?
Yeah, I was only going to just add that one of the real challenges is that there are many points along a woman's journey into the workforce where things can break down. And frequently you need to pay attention to all of them instead of just some of them, because any one can derail a career. So this is one of the places where if you can identify what those various stages are and then ensure that there's support, whether it comes from the private sector, whether it comes from philanthropy, whether it comes from government, whether it comes from civil society or community, lots of different sources, but you need to make sure you cover every one, because things will collapse along the way, just because there are so many pressures pulling back to stay at home and take care of the kids.
Alan, one question from you. Women actually, especially women, in leadership and women in workforce, there is requirement, and even in enterprise, right? So they require, networks, networking, mentoring, and learning from each other. It's super important. So LinkedIn is a platform that allows that opportunity, right? It allows opportunity for women to come to fore, but also network and learn and mentor. So what has been your experience, especially from especially insights, plus you have this immense opportunity to promote that inclusivity as well. So yeah,
right. It's so LinkedIn. I'm glad you brought up networks, especially because frequently when people are anybody is making a complex change in their career. So let's say I'm moving from one industry to another, or I'm trying to move from one company to another. It's important to have someone who can be your champion as you make that transition. I often think about networks. A good way to think about networks is it's the group of people who are willing to take a risk on you, whatever you actually might do. So you need to have those people, otherwise it's difficult to make those transitions. I mean, some people can certainly do it, and I'm going to cover in a second a little bit about how to get around that, how to reduce the importance of the network, at least a little bit. But if you can build those relationships, then you're in a much better position to be able to move forward. And you can also help other people come with you. One of the reasons it's so important to make sure that women take leadership positions in organizations is that they build a network, and that network then allows them to continue to accelerate, but it also allows them to bring others, whoever they choose, frequently other women, forward in those environments as well. So when we look globally at LinkedIn in terms of the overall numbers, we see about 49% of the entry-level workforce is women. But when you get to mid-levels, that reduces to about 38%. And then you get to the executive suite, and it's down to about 25%. So what that means is that there are there are 3 times as many men who are in a position to bring others forward than there are women. And I believe it's incumbent upon those men to ensure that their own networks are diverse. If you have that kind of power, you need to be deploying it. But but the networks are tremendously important. Now, we shouldn't rely entirely on networks. We shouldn't rely entirely on job descriptions. One of the things that LinkedIn has spent a tremendous amount of time doing recently is making sure that hiring is possible on a skills basis rather than on a degree basis. Because frequently, the kinds of things you get hired on are someone will take a chance on you, so your network, tremendously important, or you went to a fancy school where people basically, it's like, oh, I went to Harvard, or that basically I have some experience in the past, which is then my key to moving up to the next level. The issue is that there are a lot of people who should be at high levels, who should be contributing at high levels, who should be running things in these companies, who are held back by the lack of one or more of those things, which is why skills-based hiring is really useful. By taking a skills-based approach, you actually, if you're an employer, you vastly increase the number of people you can consider, because everybody who doesn't have that fancy degree or doesn't have that previous experience is now someone you might consider, which is a huge improvement over where you were. So at LinkedIn, we are attempting to move all of our clients, all the people who hire on LinkedIn, instead to use a skills-based hiring approach rather than using a degree-based or experience-based hiring approach.
Fantastic. With that, I'm going to yes, exactly, those wise words, I'm going to open up for the audiences to ask questions. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, myself Rakesh Gupta. I run a global advisory firm based out of New York. One of the things, Ellen, I would agree more is that the way we are growing, we are trying to tick box that women should be there in the institution and the leadership. But one thing we are missing is that we are not pushing them enough to get into a CXO positions or in executive leadership positions. I don't know which way it will head up to tomorrow, but I can ensure that in my company, we've got 50-50 kind of it. A CEO is a lady, and the team is a lady-led team.
That's very rare.
This is where possibly we are championing that cause. We are going to India, we are going to New York, Harvard Club, we are going to do it. To the fancy degree, unfortunately, I'm a Wharton, Columbia, Harvard. So unfortunately, that's why. But coming back to the point, that's why I think we are now launching a FFF fund, Female Founders Fund. So we'll only invest in a woman-led venture. But the question remains that why is it we don't see so many women who are almost capable or in certain cases better than men in an executive role? To all of you.
Yeah, I'll give my experience. I think it's again a demand as well as a supply challenge. As we heard, at the entry level, the proportion of women is almost parity in many industries. But I think what happens, to Alan's point, is that there are critical life stages, and in most cultures, childbirth and sometimes a little later parental care becomes a reason why women drop out or choose to take less demanding roles. And that's partly also because, one, there isn't the institutional support of, let's say, very high quality creche and childcare facilities in many countries, but also because men in some cultures don't always take, leave alone an equal share, but even a 20-25% share of care. So those stages then come at a time when women are at the cusp of moving from mid-management into senior roles. And, that's typically one of the things that makes women drop out. So that's on the sort of supply side. On the demand side, I think, gender intentionality is something that needs to be there much more in organizations, particularly when you're looking at, filling senior roles. That's not there enough. There are also subconscious or unconscious biases which lead to perceptions about women being not suitable for certain kinds of senior roles. These are unconscious biases. So that's on the demand side. I'll stop there, I'm sure.
I'll just add one point here. So before my CSO role, I used to be the CHRO for the company. And I noticed one thing. Whenever we post a senior level role, if men are 50% ready, they'll apply for the job. If the women are 90% ready, they wouldn't apply. They're like, no, I have to be 100% ready. And, there is a very good saying by Richard Branson. He says, just take it and then figure it out, right? And that's what women should do. That's what men do. They just take it and they figure it out. Women are like very perfectionists. They're like, no, I have to ace it before I go in there. And that's not how it
And
works.
the imposter syndrome as well, right? You kind of hold yourself back from even taking.
But it's really heartening to see, these women have broken the glass ceiling and are leading in their own right. So I'm like really thrilled that we are making the change, but you're right, the change has to be faster. I'm going to pass on the mic to you, and then please pass it on to the gentleman.
Hi, thank you. My name's Talia. I work at DP World with Maha. I actually have a question for Alan. Maha mentioned obviously different countries are at very different stages in terms of paving pathways for women to have those opportunities to lead, particularly in those high-value jobs that you mentioned. So obviously we'd heard examples from the panel from across the world, with Maha talking about our initiative with Bridges to Prosperity, to Abanti's example with maternity policy. So the work to be done in terms of levelling the playing field covers such a huge spectrum in terms of geography, cultural hindrances that you'd mentioned, economic disparities. So I'm just keen to understand from your perspective, when it comes to AI and technology, do you see that having parameters? Because, with all of these different kind of, nuances for local impact and for actual, progress to, barriers to entry into those economies, and then actually being there to have impact, where do you see AI and tech having a role to play there?
So it's a great question. So defining AI kind of more broadly, in other words, not just the large language models we're seeing right now, but looking into the past to machine learning and a bunch of other forms of AI that have existed before. Inevitably, those systems, on the downside, they inherit the bias of the data sets they actually use. So we had a problem at LinkedIn for a long time, which we were unaware of, and it goes back to exactly what you said, which is men put more information on their profile than women, right? Which means that our search algorithm, preferring longer documents to shorter documents, would push the men high in the search results, and women were lower, simply because there was that bias in terms of the amount of information actually provided. Literally the number of words in the profile, right?
You should tell us all the biases.
Well, and we promised to, so as soon as we discover them all. So what we did is we ended up shifting the algorithm to avoid the bias. So now when you look at the results on LinkedIn, basically we've corrected for that, and I'm happy to talk to people afterwards about it. It's a very simple fix. Going forward, I think the good thing is that there's a lot more knowledge about artificial intelligence and how it uses data and how it inherits bias. So there's a lot more conversation about it than has existed before, which is great. However, the people who run AI companies are all dudes, right? So that's not 100% true, but literally it's 3-to-1, right? Men to women. And what that means is that, and the same is true for other dimensions of diversity as well, it's a white guy thing. Yeah. And so that means that there's, in leadership roles there's just less, exactly, there's less sensitivity, and what it turns into is it has to be, somehow those organizations have to hold themselves responsible for making sure the bias is taken care of. Some are, but it's also all of our responsibility as well, because we have to keep poking them to make sure that's the case. However, artificial intelligence, to the point of people who are running lifts at Al Jaber, is potentially a very valuable thing going forward. So for instance, it's possible with AI, there's thousands of examples, but some that already exist today, is it's possible to detect bias in job listings using artificial intelligence. So you can see where you're basically using all masculine language within a job listing or in terms of the way people hire, and you can actually correct for those things. When you reach out to candidates, basically you can communicate more effectively with those candidates with the help of these systems. So that's just literally in the recruiting space. In the education space, there's gigantic opportunities for artificial intelligences to essentially provide the equivalent of customized learning on the ground, if we can get to the point where technology is available to everybody, where basically everyone kind of has their own, it doesn't exist yet, but I promise you it's on the way. They have their own tutor, effectively, who matches their level of knowledge of other things they need to learn and trains them on those things. So there are a tremendous number of opportunities. I'm not going to go into it now, but there's also a tremendous amount of potential downside in terms of job replacement and the effects of augmentation, which I think may be beyond the scope of this panel. But I'm sorry to say that frequently that will affect certain groups of people more than it will affect other groups. Now, it's all over the place. To what extent you have, sorry, I'm really getting into this. I apologize, it's just one more minute. So, in cases where there are many physical components to your job, like for instance, healthcare, being an electrician, these things where you have to combine brain and body to one extent or another, those are very resilient to large language models. However, if you're an accountant, you probably need to start looking for another job, because the things that accountants do are going to be able to be done much more easily and more cheaply by large language models over time. So there's just a lot of change coming up in those ways. I think the most important there is to become as informed as possible about AI, to learn how to use it yourself, and to pay attention like when you need to move to other stuff. Sorry, that took so long.
Thank you. My name is Srashant Patara from Development Alternatives in India. I was actually looking forward to meeting. Thank you for your insights. I mean, it's very clear, with your kind of leadership, there's so much momentum that I'm sure the needle is going to shift really fast. This isn't so much a question, but I'd just like to hear your thoughts on, one strata of society, if you're looking at India, where, they've been out of formal employment for sure, and the opportunities, at least in our work, we feel would come from grassroots entrepreneurship. If I take Uttar Pradesh, we have about 1.2 million women in the 18 to 21 age group, who would want to be meaningfully employed, and we just don't see, them being able to migrate, getting employment, etc. And therefore, we're looking at how women in the 23 to 35 age group can become job makers. In fact, I've just started a grant from the Gates Foundation to set up 200,000 women enterprises over the course of 3 years, about 2.5 jobs each. And the objective there is very simple. How do you get women from supplemental income or part-time income-based income generating activities to actually jobs that pay something of the order of $100, 8,000 rupees plus month after month in regular employment. So any thoughts on how, everything, whether it's policy or technology, partnerships, etc., how we can drill down to that level?
Since it's an India question, maybe I'll take an attempt first. So firstly, I want to say that's tremendous what you're trying to do, and I really, really applaud that, because look, leave alone women, even for men, I think entrepreneurship is a solution in a country like India, where we have a large number of young people in the workforce, and the formal economy isn't going to throw up enough jobs. I think what's important is that women build skills, not just the skills that are specific to the job, but softer skills as well. In our experience at Mahindra of, like I said, over 2 decades of skill building, we've realized that you need soft skills as well. And by that, I mean the ability, for example, to negotiate, basic computer and digital literacy, how to, communicate well, because you, as an entrepreneur, have a number of stakeholders that you have to work with. So I think skill building, which also has a soft skill building component, is important. And how do you therefore create an ecosystem of skill builders? And there is government infrastructure in terms of ITIs, polytechniques, etc. But again, private sector players like us play a role, and therefore making sure that when we are looking at women, we are not looking at them only through the cusp of creating women who can be employed in other organizations. So preparing women through skilling for entrepreneurship. So the skilling part is one. The other is market access. I think that's really, really important, because very often in the absence of market linkages and market access and and access to fair returns from the product or service that you're selling, it won't be a sustainable or scalable business. So I think the market linkages and market access are quite important. I'll just stop there for other panelists to come in.
No, I think, Bantika, you've covered it well. It is market access. It is capital access. The fact is that, more than 90% of women in India come from informal economy. And it's hard. I mean, if you think about us, women, if we're all informal economy, we're doing formal jobs. If you ask us to become entrepreneurs and give us money saying, hey, you start your business on your own, would we do it? It's harder, it's tougher, right? It is a tougher employment, and therefore, from the policy side, but also what can be done. The skilling part is extremely important, but at the same time, policies have to be put in place so that they get, markets, access to markets. There's marketing, there's mentoring, there's business development, because it's not an easy business. Yeah, exactly, correct. I'm going to come to a close, but before I do that, I'm just going to ask my panelists, each one of you, just one question. If we were to see, and if you were to see more women in workforce, what's that one change that you would bring? Yeah.
Certainly, sure. So I want to go back to the question around intentionality. I think that if there's anything that we have learned by observing organizations which are successful in terms of building diversity in their workforces of any kind, many kinds of diversity, but certainly in terms of women in the workforce, intentionality at the highest levels, in order to do that, is the key component. So it may not be possible. I think it may be unfair for organizations who have not made that commitment to judge them immediately by results, but to find a way to hold them responsible for achieving, for establishing intentionality, and then for acting on it. If I could, this is a magic wand thing, but if I could, if
love magic wands, by the way,
that would make a big difference at the company level, and as I said earlier, also at the individual level.
So it was going to be my point, but since Alan's spoken about it, I'm going to say after intentionality, it will be for me just staying the course because there is no silver bullet, and therefore organizations have to really, really sit down and do the many things that are required. But I also, though you didn't ask me this question, I want to end on a note of hope and optimism. As an industrial and manufacturing player, we now have come a long way to have only women shop floor lines in 3 of our factories. We have only women dealerships, again in 3 locations. We have an all-women graduate engineering training program in one of our businesses. And we have women engineers in our solar business who are actually leading all women teams on site. So these are, for me, lighthouse examples of what a corporation can do. They are not a silver bullet, but this is what we need to do. And we need to do it repeatedly every year across every business. Then we get home.
Maha.
Yeah. I'd say for companies, it's really important to create an inclusive culture, remove the unconscious biases, level the playing field, and let the best man or woman win. Talent is a talent. There's no gender there, right?
Thank you so much. And thanks to my panelists for sharing their thoughts, and thanks to the audiences for great questions. Thank you.